Welcome to Data and Education, a podcast recorded across time zones, teaching backgrounds, and probably too much coffee. I'm Jenelle, out in California.
And I'm Jessica, joining from Ohio.
We're the team behind Simplified.
In each episode, we host panel conversations with educators, specialists, and leaders.
From different roles, different systems, and different parts of the world.
Because data can feel overwhelming.
But student growth should be simple and collaborative. Let's get started.
Let's go. Hi, welcome. So this is our first time doing this new podcast panel where we're doing it live. So thank you so much to anybody who's joining us live, or if you're catching the replay, whether it's through the video or through the podcast, whatever it is, we're so excited to have you all listening and to have a couple friends here with us to chat about all things data. So today we are going to be talking about from data to daily decisions, what actually changes practice. My name is Jessica, as you saw in the intro. I am the Director of Analytics and Integration here at Simplified, but my background is all in education. I was a high school math teacher. I was a data coach, an instructional coach, and then I did some consulting, and now here I am. So bouncing over to Jenelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenelle McClenahan. I'm the founder and CEO of Simplified. Like Jessica, I've also been in education for over a decade as a teacher, an inclusion teacher in elementary school, and ended up founding Simplified, which is a data tracking platform that helps teachers shift from the mindset of reporting to really supporting by creating a customized path for neurodivergent and neurotypical learners.
Yeah, so like I said, today we're really talking about that daily decision making when it comes to data. We're going to kind of focus all of our thoughts and ideas around this one guiding question. How can teams turn data from something they review into something that actually drives clear daily instructional decisions in the classroom? And so before we get started with some more specific questions, I'll go ahead and bounce it over to our two panelists. We might have a third one joining us. We'll see if she's able to make it. But I will say, Fran, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you both for the invitation and the offer to be here today. I'm Fran. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, but I've been international for about 11 years and currently based in Beijing, China, where I work in an international school as a coach. And I do a bit of consulting around language and literacy with some smaller schools and reading centers in the region as well. Nice to meet you.
As well. And Dan?
Hi, thank you for having me. And I think I lose the time zone challenge here with being located in the Midwest in Illinois. But thanks for having me. I'm Dan Cox. I'm a superintendent of 15 years and recently stepped out of that in the last year and have been an executive leadership coach working closely with educators in the field, and also an ed tech advisor working with founders who are looking to bring solutions to schools to help out our kids and our teachers. I'm spending a lot of time with people doing good things and the right things that are really completely overloaded. So what I've really tried to work with is how do systems and tools reduce either the overload or the cognitive load, and without quietly adding to it.
Oh, yes. Such a good thing to focus on. And I do want to mention we are in 4 different time zones right now. So our intro was legit. We are really talking to people from all over. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with the questions. Jenelle, you want to start?
Yeah, so you guys can, take turns and whoever wants to chime in first. But our first question is, where do you think teams get stuck between looking and doing?
I'll go ahead, Dan, and then I'll pass it over to you. I think when in my observations, teams get stuck when there's overwhelm and there's a lack of clarity on how to both interpret the data, how to make sense of it, and then what to do with it. I think with that can lead to data not being particularly actionable. And I think something else that contributes to that is an absence or a lack of systems and routines around data, what to do with it. In my experience, it's something that schools do a lot at the beginning of the year. There's this big push. We'll fill out lots of spreadsheets. And then that's kind of where it ends.
So true.
Yeah, so I think that's one. There's a few areas, but I'd say that's one of it. Just a bit of the overwhelm and how to make it actionable, how to drive instruction.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, it's very. I would build upon that. It's a great place to start. I think we've all. It reminds me of that term. Most of us have probably heard at this point that our schools are data rich, but we're information poor.
Mm.
And I think, with respect to all of our educators and our teachers, many aren't psychometricians, right? You're not breaking down that data, and that's not why they got into teaching, is to really break down that data in ways. And even if they are, they don't have the time to do that, not to do it with fidelity while you're taking care of kids and teaching kids all day long. And so I believe that educators don't need more data. We have more data than we've ever had, especially with technology the way it is. What they need is clear next steps and permission to simplify. And instead of asking, what should we do next? Really, they should be asking themselves, what's going to reduce that decision fatigue first?
Mm-hmm.
This
is great.
So this is so much of what Jenelle and I have been talking about, like nonstop the last couple weeks. So
I totally agree with Fran, with just feeling overwhelmed, right? And that beginning of the year push, we're filling out all these spreadsheets. And I love that data rich versus information poor. Have you said that? That's such a great phrase. Do you want to do the next question?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about, that overwhelm, and Dan, you put it so well when you said like that decision fatigue, right? And we often find that decision fatigue is obnoxiously high for those of us that are teaching all day, because we are constantly making every decision in the book. So what helps teachers decide what matters most? How do they know where to focus their energy?
Oh man, that's really good. I think we have to look at the reality of the daily classroom versus system design. Fran mentioned this, and that's the way I think, especially being a 15-year superintendent. I think completely in systems. But what I noticed is whenever I would get into the classroom, the systems and the daily realities of the classroom didn't always align. And so I think one of the things, this may be a bit controversial, is we need to start thinking less about strategies. We are strategy to death, right? And more about less friction.
Can you give us an example of that?
So MTSS would be an example, right? I think as I'm thinking on the fly on this, one thing I had to unlearn in my superintendency as a classroom teacher and as a principal, this became second nature. But the further away I got from the classroom, I had to unlearn that better systems automatically help teachers. Sometimes they actually make things worse if we don't design it for the day-to-day reality. So like MTSS, for example, here's the question: does our process remove decisions, or does it add to them for that teacher? Is tier 1 unclear? If so, tier 2 is going to overwhelm the teachers. So our systems have to match our bandwidth. So if we don't really understand what's happening at MTSS in tier 1, how can we expect that tier 2 to work? Because we're just adding more friction to that process. And having sat in plenty of those meetings, I would say they typically add more friction than less. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, because I was a part of that system.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. There's definitely, there are a lot of times that we roll things out thinking that it's aligned with what's going on in our classrooms, but it's difficult to tell until it's moving, right? So like do you think that slowing that process down of rolling out the next initiative or rolling out the next ed tech platform or whatever it is, do we think slowing that down and giving it time to really get the feedback necessary to make sure that it's connected to what we're doing in our classrooms on a daily basis, do you think that would be beneficial?
Absolutely. If a teacher walks out of a MTSS meeting, for example, if a teacher walks out of that feeling less alone and they have one small thing that they can try next week, that matters before the model in of itself. I mean, think about that for the teacher. If they feel like, okay, this team's around me and I'm walking out with one thing that's going to help reduce friction. And that's a question we have to ask too. Is this reducing friction for the teacher and the students? And if it's adding to that, then we have to go back and have more discussion and figure out the solution that works to lower that.
Yeah, I often think about, I was part of a team that did MTSS spectacularly. It's a hard word when I'm not sick, let alone when I'm sick. Anyway, so they did so well. And so I've spent the past few years, we brought the school out of improvement status. It was lots of good growing leaps and bounds on report cards, whatever. I spent the past few years really trying to pick apart like what pieces of that made it work. And I really truly believe that slowing down that rollout and only working with like a couple of teachers at a time and making sure that what we're doing matches the amount of time that they have, the amount of bandwidth that they have, that we're not overloading them, I think was such an important part of that. And, it took us 3 years to have all teachers on board, and it was done strategically. The first year was just a couple title teachers. The second year was voluntary teachers. The third year, okay, now we've really worked out the kinks of the system. We've decided to change our platforms when it comes to viewing the data to make things really super easy. Now we can spread it to all the teachers now that we know that it's working, and the other teachers can see that it's working as well. So they want in on that, right? Like at that point, it's like, oh, I see that you guys are like excited when you can see your students growing. I want to feel that.
Would it be fair to say with the example you gave there that in that particular scenario, your small data informed your team better than the big framework?
Absolutely. That tiny data is everything. The number of times I say tiny data when we're talking, look at the tiny data.
I love it.
Stop looking at the big data. It's the tiny data.
Yeah.
And I think if we just focus on one type of data at a time, I think that simplifies things. And from that, starting with that one piece, whatever it be, one strand of math, reading fluency, syntax, anything that's just very specific, and using that, almost as your foundation and creating the systems. And then, to add to what Dan said, you can really have that collaborative approach. And with that, I think the buy-in is there. The buy-in from teachers is there. Teachers aren't asking to assess, and they're not, they're being told this is handed to them. And when I did my teacher preparation 17 years ago now, that was not included in it. We knew about assessments and how do we analyze those assessments. That was not a component. From what I understand, it's still not a component of teacher preparation programs today. So I think, start small, and build and build and build and build. But that one piece of data, make it really specific to the teacher or to a grade level. However, keeping in mind that you don't want, 8 or 9 different microsystems created under that one roof either at the same time. We have to be a little careful, but I do agree that, start small, use that one type of data, that one data point to build a system, to build collaboration, and then grow from that point on, keeping in mind that we don't always have the tools to make sense of the data.
Yeah.
I think that we're all in agreement about small, tiny data. I would love to hear a very specific example, speaking of tiny data, I love to just hear, just a specific example that you have in the classroom of a small tiny data that led to a very meaningful shift, like, something you were talking about, math or literacy, either Dan or Fran. Rhymes.
I know, right? How do we get rhyming names? We didn't even plan that.
Sure. I'll speak a bit to a few years ago, we made that shift away from balanced literacy, or we started making that shift, I should say. We're still making the shift from balanced literacy to more structured literacy. And when we brought in structured literacy and phonics programs, we realized we needed to change our assessments to match that, because we were previously using Fuentes and Pinel or FNP. And the data is just not actionable from FNP. So when we moved to DIBELS, where we actually get very specific data points, because you've got this color-coded system, et cetera. So we found that it was a bit easier not only to administer, but that rate of reliability was quite a bit lower, and that was really important for us. So for example, what we found was with FNP, 4 teachers looking at the same reading record would maybe analyze it differently, and also maybe, and what they would have it at. For example, teacher A would place that student, that reading piece at a C, somebody else at an E. Keeping in mind, FNP was also created for guided reading, and yet we're using it as a screener. That's another area of data sometimes. Are we using these assessments the way they were meant to be used and created? So when we moved over to DIBELS, one piece for us was oral reading fluency. And looking at words correct per minute. So one thing that we did was we started bringing fluency practice into this as well. So, we were using a phonics program. Fluency was a component of it, a decodable, but by no means, given that I work with multilingual learners as well, we knew that for us, we needed to really look at fluency. And that's something that, we started incorporating with our lower primary, and I work with the EAL team. So really starting to think of, okay, what is that 20 minutes that you can do, during your structured literacy block, during your phonics intervention. I work with the tier 2, tier 3 team. What are those small little tweaks that you can make around oral reading fluency, so that students can, improve their words correct per minute, and at the same time make sense of what they're reading. That was the other part to it too. They could decode, and when you looked at the decoding data, the words correct per minute, it was okay, but we knew that it was really preventing comprehension. And while decodable texts are not written for comprehension, just answering those general gist questions, we noticed students were having a hard time with that. So just those, like I said, those little 20-minute tweaks or 15-minute tweaks that you can implement a couple times a week, ensuring that you've got progress monitoring there to see that it's working, that it's making a difference. And like Dan said, it was something simple. It was one point, and then just work from that. So that was one thing that we've implemented around language, around reading.
Can I ask what progress monitoring looked like and how regularly that was taken?
Yeah, so DIBELS has progress monitoring in it as well. So the progress monitoring, it's a 1-minute timed reading of a passage. And we do sometimes go off benchmark. For example, I'll be working with grade 4 students. However, they're currently at a grade 2 because they're multilingual learners. So, we'll be benchmarking at that grade 2 level. That's where that's where they are, for example, in a scope and sequence, phonics scope and sequence. And that's generally every couple of weeks that we're working with them. Yeah. And that's based on, a tier 2, 4 times a week, 4 to 5 times a week intervention, and progress monitoring every couple weeks. Some programs, like UFly has their own unit progress monitoring, but that can be, you can go quite a while before you'd progress monitor. And I think we have to be careful sometimes that, is the tier 2. And I think Dan was alluding to this a little bit with MTSS, with that tier 2, when it's overwhelmed, when it's a bit exhausted, we need to make sure that it's being effective. And when we look at data, we've got our screeners, we've got those diagnostic tools, but the progress monitoring tools are equally important. We need to identify the who in the screeners. We need to identify the what and the how in the diagnostic assessment tools, but the progress monitoring is equally important because that will tell us, is it working? And from that, you're just tracking the data. Are the words correct per minute? Are we seeing that number go up and up? It's almost like a graph. Are we seeing that number go up and up and up? Is it staying the same? That's very valuable information as well, without waiting, a couple of months to determine if the intervention's been effective.
I love that. I think that as I even hear you talk about the DIBELS and the implementing regular practice and then having those 2 to 3 weeks of progress monitoring, even just thinking of that system, that seems doable, right? I'm curious to know, there's data, there's all the numbers, and there also is the holistic aspect of, how teachers are feeling about implementing that practice. And I'm curious, after seeing, because something Jessica and I constantly talk about with Simplified is connecting those actions with the data, right? So I'm curious to see how your teachers, we want their buy-in, we want them to be committed to doing this and seeing their progress and be like, wow, I did that. I, practiced with them for 20 minutes a day and look how they have improved. I'm curious to see how your teachers felt after, really focusing on that one piece of data and then regularly progress monitoring.
Buy-in can be a challenge. And I think sometimes that resistance, it's a bit more a sense of self-protection than it is. So that's kind of the lens that I wear when I'm going into these conversations or into this professional development is it's self-protection. So, when it's not there, coming from a place of compassion and understanding is very important. And I think this is why we need to be clear on the why. Why are we doing this? At the very least, whether it's connected to a school mission and vision, a goal, whether that goal is coming from, a Ministry of Education, a higher body. I'm working in more independent schools, so it's generally maybe coming from the school board or a smaller group. What is the why? And always keeping in mind that, we're doing this to move a school forward. We're always trying to move a school forward. So we've learned a lot about literacy. The world of language and literacy has been in a bit of turmoil and we're learning more and more and more about it. And we know better now. And we know that we have assessment tools that are easy to implement, that have better rate of reliability, meaning, how you interpret the data, there's less margin for error. And at the same time, we know that this can better drive instruction. So I think, there's many moving parts when you're implementing or bringing in change, many, many, many moving parts, but be clear on the why. Understand that asking a teacher to change a practice that they've had for a long time, it's not going to happen overnight, and that's okay. I think those conversations, those disagreements really can lead to very rich conversations. And at the same time, keeping in mind that what we know now is what we didn't know 10 years ago. And what we know now is what we can do to make things stronger, improve language outcomes, improve literacy outcomes, improve numeracy outcomes, et cetera, et cetera.
Sorry, I had to go off camera for a little bit. I'm having a coughing attack. So we were talking before we started recording it, and I mentioned it earlier, but I am part of the sick crew this holiday season. So, and of course, I've been mostly fine talking all day until just now. That's how it always works. But definitely still listening. Yeah, I know, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just
I love that. I think resistance is self-protection is a really key. That's a great phrase to look at as you're working with teachers. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Fran, well done. It's spoken like a true coach, always moving forward, right? Moving those teams forward, moving your schools forward. When Fran talked about the self-protection and just kind of the defense walls that get put up, that's one thing that really stuck with me, especially when I was a principal. I was before moving into the superintendency, I was a principal of a large 3rd through 5th grade intermediate school, right in the wheelhouse of where it's really important for kids to be at grade level, but also with their reading, but also the state exams start, coming into play at that time. So it's a lot of fun, but there's pressure with that. And I remember clearly, one year I had a team. There was 8 teachers per grade, and it was a 5th grade team who were phenomenal. They were phenomenal teachers and better people. And that particular year, the state exam results didn't come back like we had hoped. And I'll never forget, I was surprised even how broke up the teachers were. There was a few of them that were absolutely sobbing. And we had to pull back 3 years worth of data, and not just the state exam data, and say, and just tell them, look at all of this. Look at everything we've done and look at where these kids are. And that was the first aha moment for me, where I realized how personal that was, and right, wrong, or indifferent, people viewed that as a reflection of their ability, instead of information. And that's where I started to look at it, as saying, instead of looking at this data as a skill of your kid or of your students or your skills, let's just look at that as information and become investigators. And then we spent time looking at everything, and we became investigators instead of trying to say, well, here's what's wrong. It just became a much more inquisitive process, and that felt better.
Yeah. Wow, that's really powerful. I can, as a teacher myself, I think, you take everything you do very personally. I mean, it's a very personal profession, right? And so you take pride in knowing how your students are doing. But I love the shift in the mindset of information, like looking at information and becoming an investigator. That's a very powerful shift. My next question is, what routines do you think make data usable instead of overwhelming? Like, what would you think is something that educators can implement on a regular basis that they need to kind of get used to or build? We're Jessica and I have been really focused on how do we get our users to build habits, right? As there are people who are using it regularly, and our biggest users are actually paraprofessionals and special educators in self-contained classrooms, but they're already regularly taking data, right? Like just on behavior so what do you guys think when it comes to just building that routine?
I think it's a shift in shift in our questioning, in our inquiry. Instead of what's wrong, what are they not doing, what can't we do, it's just what's missing, what skill is missing. I just said it in the last piece on that information piece. What skill is missing, and start looking at it from that standpoint. So really it depersonalizes it from the blame game, the teachers self-blaming themselves, or saying the kids can't do it, or the parents don't help, whatever thing may come out of those first knee jerks that we all know nobody truly believes. It's just frustration. I think it's just asking that question of what skill is missing, and going and looking at that data as information to try to find it. So it's just reframing the conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to just add to that I think, start with those small, simple routines. We've touched on this already, but, having regular kind of data check-ins. When people work in silos, we have to be cautious of that. And I think when Dan referred to MTSS at the beginning of the call, that's when we do MTSS well, we're looking at data with a few different lenses. That tier 1 lens, that tier 2 lens, looking at it from, if you've got a data coordinator, learning support, an ELL or EAL specialist or reading specialist. So I think when you take the time, and other tier 1 teachers as well, other homeroom teachers, I think when you take, I work with a lot of grade levels, and those teams that take, 20 to 30 minutes, every couple of weeks and prioritize that, to look at those small data points. And that can just be, bring in your ORF, your oral reading fluency data. Let's bring in a writing sample, a 5-minute prompt writing sample, or, their first draft of their fantasy story, for example. And looking at that, just prioritizing that time, in your meetings, in those grade level or those PLCs, whatever system your school has in place, to look at that work. And I think when we're doing it as a grade and a whole, a group of people, I think that fear of that teacher judging themselves of, am I going to have the worst data? Am I going to have the weakest data? I think that's a very legitimate fear and concern, because it is very personal, like Jenelle said. But just prioritizing that time every couple weeks, and doing it as you're moving through a unit. We sometimes do that after the fact. Let's all bring in, their published writing on, or informational text or fantasy or whatever they've done. And it's great to do that. But let's maybe do it throughout as well. I think that's, what happens with, we have that beginning and that end, and then it's all the in between that we sometimes don't look at and don't prioritize, and time is often a factor. But that's something that's, I think, a simple routine, and it's consistent. And I think when done properly, can really support collaboration and really support instruction that's purposeful and intentional. And and those little, 15, 20 minutes can lead to something bigger. We're just getting the snowball rolling, so to speak, but it can lead to something bigger. And I've noticed when that's done, the buy-in is there, because then we realize, okay, we're not looking at data or samples to critique each other and to judge each other, but we're really looking at it from the student. What do the students need? And that tier 1, I think it was Dan who touched on tier 1. I work as a tier 1 coach in upper elementary. It often is unclear. If you asked 4 grade 3 teachers how they would go about, planning a unit on, you'd have 4 very different answers. And not one is wrong or right or better, but just coming from that core lens of, what do the students need? And that's just a simple shift that can make, but it can make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think, and you guys have touched on this a little bit already, but when you are able to focus it more on what exactly that student needs, then that sets you up to be able to see whether or not your student is growing in that skill or in that area, which is really what we need. And that's what starts that snowball effect, right? That's what gets us feeling good about things. And just to pull it back to that tiny data, if you're looking at big data, you could see a big shift. Maybe you see, oh, awesome. Like let's go the route most teachers don't experience. We saw like a huge jump in our scores. Even if you have that huge positive jump in your scores, do you really know what you did that led to that huge jump? Probably not. Like, you could probably think of a few different things, right? But being able to use that tiny data to actually connect those very specific actions to the impact that they're having, not only teaches you what works, or teaches you what works for that student specifically, because you never know if it works for the rest of them, but it also it connects those things in your brain. And it's like, oh, I did this and it led to this, and now I know that I have control. And there's not a lot that we have control over these days. So knowing that you have control over that student's growth based on exactly what you did is just, that's the gold. That's what creates that efficacy, right? And then you do it in groups and you get the collective teacher efficacy. So, all right. Did you have a follow-up question, Jenelle, or do you want me to go to the next one?
No, go ahead. You can.
Okay, cool. So now that I can talk again,
I was like, oh no, she left me.
You're dying off camera, but it's okay. Janelle's got it. Okay,
It's the way of going live, right?
Yeah, right. If we were recording this not live, it would be totally fine. You know,
Cut it out.
I would just talk the whole time.
People want authentic. In the age of AI and videos, people want authentic. So here you go. There's nothing.
I know, right?
There you go. It's not AI. Me losing my voice and having a cough attack is not AI. I am officially a human. Okay, so the next thing we want to kind of think about is like when, and we've touched on this in lots of different ways, but I'm curious to hear just kind of like your guys' holistic thoughts on this. When does looking at data actually start to change classroom practice? So maybe even if we like kind of drill that down, we've talked a lot about like groups of teachers and collaboration, but what if we're working just with one teacher specifically? Let's say we're at a school where we don't have teams that are teaching the same content or the same grade level, and those teachers are kind of on their own. What kind of environment, what kind of support, what kind of tools does that teacher need in order to really be able to use data to change their classroom practices?
I would like to zoom out before I zoom in.
No, I told you to zoom in.
And I think it applies to a lot of things that we're discussing here. Listening to Fran talk on in her insights on that last response. What's the data we know in education? And we're trying to help kids obviously move the needle in student learning. That's the whole purpose of all of this, is move the needle in student learning. But we also want our teachers to have efficacy. I think, Jessica, I heard you use that word just a few minutes ago. What we know through work with the Education Advisory Board, we know nationally that the top two barriers to teacher morale or teacher efficacy is time and resources and recognition and value. So whether it's a team of teachers or whether it's that individual teacher who's the one third grade teacher who just came out of college and doesn't know all the things they didn't teach in grad school or in undergrad, right? Does that teacher even have the time and resources to be successful? Can we answer that question? The second question then is, are we giving the proper recognition and value to the work that's being done as it's being done along the way, and not being stuck in the past, which is where the coaching part comes in. Coaching can recognize the past, but we don't live there. We take the present and always move forward. And so then when we move down into the student level or the individual teacher level, it's for me, that one teacher is already overwhelmed. When you're responsible by yourself for an entire grade level and nobody to support you, that's really overwhelming. You look at those small rural schools and you see that very often. Can you try one small support before you escalate it? Escalate it up. And does this reduce stress for my students, and does it reduce stress for me? It may sound simple, but I think sometimes in the theme of tiny data, I think simple actions work as well.
Love that.
Yeah, I think Dan brings a very good point. We have to meet teachers where they are. And as a coach, that's very important. And a teacher who's feeling very overwhelmed for good reason, that's going to be challenging. It is going to be challenging. So I think when teachers feel empowered, that's when the practice, the changes in the practice and using data to change the practice can come into play. And I think to do that, for teachers to feel empowered, there needs to be a lot of things at the school level, at that holistic level, in place, a lot of structures and systems in place. And at the same time, there needs to be the supports for that one individual based on their unique needs, where they are in their teaching journey. But I think ultimately teachers need to feel empowered. And not only is it with the resources they have now, but what are the resources that they're going to need, to move forward when they're implementing data, when they're making those changes, and do they feel like what Dan said? I think you brought two good points. We have to look at the time and resources to support this. And then are the teachers going to feel recognized, valued, and supported? Let's not forget the importance of psychological safety that teachers, when we're implementing anything, small, big, at the board level, school level, grade level, homeroom level, that's very, very important. We don't talk about this very much. Like Dan said, we need to move things forward. We want to move that needle forward. I don't think any educator would challenge that and say, well, no, we don't. Everything we're doing is great and perfect. I'd be surprised to really hear people today really challenge that. It's the way it is right now is perfect, and it's utopia, and it's rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, and we're going to stay with it. But at the same time, what do leaders and schools need to put in place to support time, to support resources, recognition, feeling valued? That's a huge piece of that. I talked about those many moving parts, and those are some of the moving parts right there that leaders need to be aware of when asking any change at any level, any small change. But I think teachers need to feel empowered, I think, ultimately. And I think, like Dan said, those two things, time, resources, recognition, and value, is really drive that sense of feeling empowered. Yeah.
I have a follow-up to that, and I think you guys are, spot on with what you're saying, and it reminds me a lot of like in the work that I've done with consulting schools. I consulted for a few years on data visualization, data culture, and data literacy. And when we talked about data culture, we really broke down what key aspects were there. And I love the way that you guys put it. I tend to kind of funnel it into 6 pillars, and that's the trust, the psychological safety, the collaboration, building the capacity, making sure that your leadership is modeling data use. And then the last one is protected time. So it's spot on. My question to you, my follow-up question is, how do you protect that time? As an administrator, as a coach, as a superintendent, how do you make sure that teachers are given the time that they need to really like sit down and go through those data cycles and be able to connect their actions to impact? I've seen a very dramatic gifting of time, in the sense that in the last district I was in, we had no students on Mondays. So Mondays, half the day was dedicated to working in teams, and then the other half was protected time for teachers for planning, for using data. But I'm curious what other solutions you guys have seen, if you've seen any.
Yeah, I've seen them move to that as well, and it can work or it can be a disaster, right? There has to be some thought around that whenever you design those systems. And then there's things that are really simple. I think identifying tasks that drain your time, it's very difficult, but sometimes we do have to look at what we like to do versus things that we need to do. And not saying you shouldn't have fun or that you shouldn't have those passion projects that you want to teach, but you do have to look at some of the things that are within your control. There are 1,440 minutes in a day. And I know if anybody that's ever worked with me hears me say that, they will roll their eyes, because I would always say, hey, there's 1,400. We decide how we use those, right? But look at, is there things that are draining my time that are no longer productive and they've just become, when we put something on, and this is so hard, is when we add something new or do something new, what are we taking off the table? And that becomes a very difficult discussion. And quite frankly, that's something that's hard to do, because when you get a program or a software or fill in the blank that you're used to using, you don't want to have to learn anything new. So you just keep adding to that. So I think those things are conversations you have to have. However, on the positive side of this, one thing that I have seen that has tremendous potential that we're scratching the surface on now is how we do use AI in the education space and in the workplace in general to identify things that do drain time, that help you create first drafts instead of starting from scratch, help you take your data. Here's what I love. Can we take all this data and all this abbreviations and MTSS and all these data and ask AI to put it into talking points that parents understand?
Yes.
Because somehow, and I'm as guilty as anyone, we're incapable of talking the way that a parent understands when it comes to student data, right?
Yes.
And so those are things that help us. So I am excited about that piece of it, but it has to be an intentional conversation. And unfortunately, no matter how you want to slice it, it's painful. It's work for everybody.
I think this is going to sound very, simple, but just you have to make the time. You have to prioritize the time. So I've worked in schools where they have a PLC, and every Monday, it was generally Monday morning. We do have students, so that's what usually when they were in PLCs, when they were in specialists and the professional learning committee, and that would maybe kind of be organized by lower primary, upper primary, and maybe middle school, 7 and 8. But it would kind of be like a K-2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 to 8, meeting at different times throughout that day. School I'm in currently, it's a large school. We have about 4 or 5 homerooms per grade level in primary. So those grade level teams meet twice a week, and that's part of their schedule. That's mandated. It's part of the schedule, and that's very important. And it's protected time. It's protected time. It's important time. I think, like Dan said, we have to be careful about how we use the time, and is it really intentional and purposeful, or are we going through a checklist? We have to watch there, but the time is a gift. But that has to be prioritized. And I think when that comes from senior leadership, that, as a team, you're going to meet twice a week. This time it's protected. That right there, I think, sets the tone, a standard of collaboration and working together. So I think, and like I said, same with the professional learning committees, when it comes from the top, that this is the expectation. And this is, part of the responsibility of the school. But with that's not enough. I think, like Dan said, that's not enough. Now you need to make sure that what you're doing and how you're using that time is valuable and important. I'd say the gift of time is always key.
There's so many nuances too. When you look for creative solutions, there can be things. This was never a second thought for me. One core tenet I had as a superintendent was, if it's worth doing, it's worth paying for. So if you're working on something after school or it's taking that extra time, it was really never a thought. We just budgeted for that, and we had that, right? And it was just not a question. And I think that was appreciated. Did it solve all the problems? It absolutely did not. Did it solve the challenges of time? No, but at least there was some of that recognition that, hey, your time is valuable. We see you working extra on this. Something else is when we look at teachers doing things, like say they're trying to pilot a new strategy or a new program. Is there a way to work collaboratively through your policy, through your contracts and everything, to make sure those teachers that are doing that aren't evaluated that year, or you're doing it in their off year? It was a really small little trick that helped with that teacher stress. That they could have. It's like, oh my gosh, you mean I've got to pilot or try this new strategy and I'm supposed to be evaluated this year? Right? And even if they were I saw teachers who could teach circles around me be stressed out about it. And I'd be like, you don't have to be stressed, but they were. Even if I told them it didn't matter, because it was that they were meeting their standard, not mine. And that was really important for me. And I know I'm rambling a little bit about that, but there's just so many nuances that you can look and you can have conversations with your teachers. And I think to value them, you ask them, how can we help you with time?
Yeah, that makes sense. Hold on real quick, Jenelle. I just want to shout out. We got our first comments on YouTube from Alicia,
hi,
of course. Hi, Alicia. We love you. I think this came up at the end of when you were talking the first time around, Dan, when you were talking about making sure that we're spending that time wisely. She says, yes, ask us. Yes, love it. No. Okay, now hide. I'm learning how to use this
That
new
was
technology
cool.
stream. I know, right?
Asking too, sometimes it's giving permission. I probably could have stepped on my own toe. My kids were in my schools, and my daughter, she's 26 now, but to a team one year, I think she was in 4th grade, and we were having a team meeting. And I said, hey, my daughter has learned about dinosaurs and built volcanoes every year since 1st grade. And later, one of the team leaders came to me and said, so are you saying we don't have to do the volcano unit? I'm like, please don't. They're like, we hate that. And laughed. It was like this. I'm like, why are they doing it? And the teachers are like, why are they making us do this? And nobody'd ever had the time. So I just kind of made this off the cuff thing. And then afterwards, because everybody's looking at me like, did he just say that? And I thought, oh man, I really made them mad, And the principal, and I was a young principal. I'm like, oh man, and then the team leader came down later. She's like, so you're saying we don't have to do the dinosaur unit? I'm like, or whatever. I'm like, no, we don't have to do it.
Love it.
I love it. So we're starting to wrap things up, and unless Jessica, do you have any other follow-up questions to that?
No, I'm good. Those are great notes.
I know, those are great.
Volcanoes and dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I've been taking notes, and I'm going to explain why exactly. But 4 things to kind of sum up that I've heard you guys both say is really validating where our teachers, our educators are at when it comes to data. I've heard prioritizing time. I think you're totally right, Fran, that you just have to make the time. And when you make it a priority, you make this, purposeful time, that's where your value is, right? That's where where it goes. We've also talked a lot about small and tiny data. And so really starting small with data and implementing a small support, small strategy. And then lastly, I think a huge part too is collaboration. That part of, Dan, what you're saying when it comes to being an investigator of that information, I kind of think it ties together what Fran was saying too, that like when we're collaborating, and this is no longer about my personal, deficiency, right? But it's actually about the student's needs, that really, comes to highlight exactly why we're looking at data. We're looking to see what these kids need. And with that, I kind of want to take a few steps back to what, Dan, you were saying about how we need to make language easier for parents. So just a little background about me. I started Simplified really because when my child was diagnosed with autism, you go through all these different evaluations and you go to, ABA therapy. And I'm a teacher. I know all the acronyms, right? But within the special education sector, there's so much more that I didn't know, and so much more language that I felt what it feels like to be a parent outside, right? And I'm like, well, how do I help support my kid today? And bottom line, that came to a point where I became obsessed with I can statements. And so what our platform does is we really look to make language like really simple and clear so that there's no gatekeeping of knowledge. We all want to help these children, right? We want to help our students. And so we have really developed a system where we use I can statements to build from the most simple step to mastery. And so as you guys were talking, I did build some, I can statements based on what you were saying. But I'm curious, before I even share those, if you guys came up with your own for like, when it comes to making data into daily practice.
I did my homework.
Oh, awesome.
I can simplify one data point into a clear next step.
I love it. I can simplify.
Mine was almost identical. I can pick one simple evidence-based strategy to try with that student or group to target a specific skill.
I love it. Some of the things I captured from what you guys were saying, Fran, you talked about I can focus on one kind of data, which was dibbles, right? I can implement a regular practice, fluency, 20 minutes a day. I can progress monitor regularly. So we like to like build up to, you know, like mastery, like they're like steps. Dan, something I heard you say is I can identify tasks that are draining time. I can identify one thing to take off of my list, and I can integrate AI to save time in meaningful ways. I feel like that's a great step. Do you have anything to like add? Do you agree, disagree with those?
No, I absolutely agree with those.
Yeah, you guys have dropped some great knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to kind of like really give people, you know, what they can take from this panel and walk away with some very specific next steps for them as well. And so we also wanted to mention that we do have a free resource that we will link in the show notes. It is all about how to progress monitor. So it goes through, you know, asking yourself, what would it look like or sound like when a student can do this skill independently in the beginning as they're developing, when they reach mastery, really helping you break down whatever skill it is the student is working on into those tiny I can statements, because not only does that help you communicate to them what they need to be able to do, but it also makes it much easier for you to see their growth. And that's the whole point of all of this is being able to see that growth and feeling like you are capable of helping the students grow. So we will link to that free resource. How you get it is essentially you just log on you create a free trial account on Simplified. We'll have that link in the show notes as well. And then it's in our library resource with a ton of other resources as well. We are going to wrap up. I want to say huge thank you to Dan and Fran. I don't know if we'll ever get rhyming names again, but I love it. Big thanks to you guys for coming out and sharing all of your wisdom. Of course, thank you so much for viewing, those of you that are viewing live, those of you that are hitting the replay. Alicia is here with us live, which is also cool. I can't wait to see you on Friday, Alicia. So, yeah, big thanks, and we appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That wraps up today's conversation.
Huge thanks to our panelists for sharing their perspectives and real experiences.
If you're looking for the free resources mentioned in this episode,
you'll find them in the show notes, along with a free trial of Simplified.
It's a chance to explore tools designed to make learning and behavior more visible,
and to see what clearer, simpler data can look like in practice.
We'll see you next time on Data and Education. Data, 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 data.
What do I say?
Data.
Data?
Yeah.
I say data, huh?